I think the truth is we love it when we see people laugh. I've noticed this in my parenting. I got a couple of girls, and I can be, actually at home, I can be a little bit serious and a little bit heavy. Sometimes my personality is that way, and I've noticed that, or maybe because of that, my children love it when I laugh. I can't say for sure what's going on there, but it feels in them like a kind of relief. For those of you who have anxious parents, you may know what I mean. Maybe it's that if the parent is laughing, the children don't feel like they have to take care of the parent anymore emotionally. But I think laughter indicates that something broader is happening. I think a baseline of delight in life kind of just says, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I think children are looking for cues. They're trying to figure out, as Einstein once said, the most important question is whether the universe is a hostile or hospitable place. And so they kind of look at the adults who they see to be keepers of the mystery of life, and they want to know, is it all going to be okay? So even though our joy and our delight is not a practical gift to children or to people in general, it's not a vacation or a birthday party or a new bike, there is some kind of gift of delight, even of good news, when we laugh or when we're full of delight. And I think this is probably true generally. I think it's probably true that people generally live under a burden, a heaviness in life. It's hard to feel good about the self these days, I think, because we have a chance to compare ourselves to all the parade of images that suggest that we are not enough in ourselves. Of course, advertising their project is to make you feel like you're lacking something, and so that you'll buy the product or subscribe to the experience or something. So we're getting about 1,000 messages a day that tell us we lack something and we need to go purchase or experience this. We're not quite as successful, they tell us, as we need to be, and we feel it too. We're not as successful as we need to be. We don't have quite as meaningful a job as we want, or we're not doing quite as well in school, or we're not doing not as wealthy. So in that way, we kind of carry that burden, that gap between who we are and who we feel we should be in success. We also kind of feel that every moment in life should be kind of a peak experience, a thrill and intensity. We're all plagued with this new phenomenon called FOMO, F-O-M-O, fear of missing out. It's why you can't fast from Facebook or lay your phone down for a while, because we all suffer from FOMO, fear of missing out of some peak experience that is about to happen that we're not going to be a part of unless we pay close attention. And then generally, I think people, and maybe Christians in particular, feel like, gosh, we should be better people than we are. And so we carry with us a kind of disappointment with ourselves, and of course there are things to be disappointed with. There is sin. And so we carry with us that burden. So it's a little bit of a riddle when Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I think for people generally, that's a bit of a riddle. And I even think for Christians, that's a little bit of a riddle. It's like, really? Your yoke is easy and your burden is light? Because sometimes we experience the heaviness. Now, he did say of the Pharisees, he says the Pharisees, what they do is they just create these heavy packs, in this case of morality. They should be better. And he says the Pharisees, he says, woe to you, you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, but you don't lift a finger to help them. So Jesus even speaks in religious circles that there's a temptation to be loaded down with that burden. Apparently, though, that is not what should characterize our lives primarily. Now, there are going to be times of sadness and sorrow. That's a little bit of a different matter. But according to Galatians 5:22, right, the characteristics that the Spirit wants for us are things that are kind of lighter. And just the first three, right? Love, joy, and peace. You see how that speaks to kind of lightness as opposed to a kind of burden. Well, anyway, this is all to say that I think we do intuitively sense that delight is a burden. I mean, delight is a relief as opposed to the burden of life. Delight is a relief. And we might, in Christian terms, say good news is a relief. And so part of our Christian life, a great part of it, I might even see the central calling of our Christian life, is to take in more deeply and more deeply the good news. To find some ways in cooperation with the Spirit to be filled, as Ephesians 3 says, with the love of Christ beyond knowledge. That's another riddle. How are you filled with the love of something? How do you know something beyond knowledge? Well, the hope is this delight, this good news will become a kind of intuition in us. Instead of the burden that is kind of always on us, there would be a sense of relief, of good news. Our theme this year, of course, is From This Place, Proclaiming Good News in a Changing World. And I think for some time now, I, as a kind of a little more anxious person, a little heavier person, I have really felt the calling in my life to take this good news in deeply the last several months. And I find myself to be a little more of a visual learner than I thought. And I've been dwelling a little bit more on artistic representations in my spiritual life. What the words of a sermon are for the ear, sometimes art can be for the eye if it's trying to express a truth or reality. And we see this in the scriptures, right? The prophets were often given visions that launched their prophetic careers. Things were spoken, but they were given something to see. And one thinks, of course, immediately of Isaiah chapter 6. He goes to the temple, as I think he would have normally done, and suddenly he sees the Lord seated on the throne, the train of his robe filling the temple, the seraphim and cherubim singing, "Holy, holy, holy." And of course, we see this in Daniel as well, Elijah, Revelation. And of course, we have our own visual pictorial outside against the science building, a representation called the Word, in which there are actually no words, but it is a representation of Jesus, the Word made flesh, for us to kind of visually pass by each day and take in the good news of Christ. But lately I've been dwelling on this particular painting, and we're going to spend the rest of our time, kind of our morning devotional, is going to be on this painting by an old Russian painter named Andrei Rublev, 15th century. It hangs now in the Tretyakov Museum in Moscow. And when we look at something like this, as opposed to our Volkswagen video a minute ago, it's pretty unexciting. It's not a terribly dynamic representation. The characters are pretty stiff. It's pretty static. There doesn't seem to be a lot going on. But sometimes with works like these, it's the very stillness of it that starts working on you. And after a while, you realize that the artist doesn't really need to be original or profound if it's an eternal truth. You don't need to be original or profound with eternal truths. You need to let them sink in. Now, this one actually has been called the painting of the Holy Trinity. And so the first question with a painting that has this title that confronts the viewer, of course, is the question, well, this is the Holy Trinity, then who is who in this picture? If it's the Holy Trinity, then presumably one is meant to be the Father, one is meant to be the Son, one is meant to be the Spirit. And while this painter, by the way, believed that no one could represent these figures, especially he believed from 1 Timothy 6 that the Father lives in unapproachable light, whom no one has seen nor can see, still there is meant not a realistic portrayal, but a symbolic or spiritual truth here. So take a moment right now, and who would you say is who? Just in the kind of in your own mind right now. Who would you pick out as a father? Who would you pick out as a son? Who would you pick out as a spirit? Well, I'm not going to play the game where I know the answer and you have to guess it. I'll just tell you. In the history of interpretation, it's pretty well established that the figure in the middle is meant to be Jesus. The figure on the right is meant to be the Spirit. The figure on the left is meant to represent the Father. Why would that be? Well, let me ask you this. You bring the house lights up a little bit. I'm actually going to go to this side. I'm going to ask these people over here. Why might the middle figure represent Jesus? Actually, you were going to say something. What do you think about the middle figure looks like Jesus? There's a tree by his head, right. He is in a that line of vision. Of course, the tree is a symbol for the cross, also for the second Adam. The first Adam and Eve ate from the forbidden tree. Jesus came to be the second Adam, not to make that mistake. So yeah, the tree and the cross. Good. Anything else about the middle figure? Yeah. Could be black. Yeah, this is actually a poor reproduction. It's actually purple, but I like black. You're right, there's something darker. I'll tell you what there is. You're onto something. There's something earthier about his colors in that sense. But it's actually purple. Anybody know why purple would be appropriate? That's kind of a deep purple. Again, poor reproduction. Deep purple for Jesus? Royalty, yeah. Yeah, he is the king. And so the deep purple and the sash of gold would indicate that royalty in him. I think the only other thing we could say is that he is the center. He is the one presented to us. In earlier pictures, he's actually looking right at the viewer. This is a little bit of a nuance on this one, but he is the one that we were given to look at. He is right in our line of sight to represent the Father. If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. So Jesus is in the middle, not because he's higher than the other two, but because he is the one who's been given to us by the Father in which we are to see God. I'm going to go down to the middle section here. I'm going to ask, what about the figure on the right might speak the Holy Spirit? Yeah, the Spirit, he said the Spirit is listening to the one in the middle, or at least one of the other two, kind of bowed, and if it is Jesus too, it would make sense that Jesus is the one who promised the Spirit. Anything else about yeah? Green is the color of new life. Exactly. The Spirit, of course, is the one who is bringing the new life that Christ offered in the Spirit. Would identify. How about the figure on the left now? I'm going to go to these people over here. What about this might represent the Father? Yeah. Both of the others are, with the gestures of their heads and their hands, are really submitting to the Father. Both of them are bowed. The person on the left is not, at least not as much. The robe, what about it? It is different. Some of the same colors, but it seems to have a different quality to it. It's a little more radiant. It's gold. There's a bit of a shimmer to it. Some have seen in that a kind of pure quality. And it's been noted, by the way, that just that the arms of the Christ figure and the Spirit, the right arm of Christ is loose. The blue kind of hinders the left arm, but the left arm of the Spirit is also free, and that's traditional for religious art, in which the Spirit and the Son are the right and left hands of the Father carrying out his work. So, this is about the Holy Trinity. The question is, why they're distinct. Of course, the painter also wanted to suggest there are ways in which they were similar, of the same substance. So, notice they're all about the same form and size. Their faces even, there wasn't quite an effort really made to distinguish their faces from one another. There's a kind of similarity to the faces. They all carry staves in their hand. They all have the same types of garments, though there might be different. And they all have that intense blue, that azure blue that represents God. Notice that Jesus displays more of it, not because he is more God, but because he was showing himself to us as God. The Father being less visible to us, whom no eye has ever seen, but underneath, he is fully God, of course. And in fact, of course, the three of their gazes intersect, right? Even as the Son looks to the Father looking maybe to the Spirit, the three of their gazes, they seem to be in this close, intimate, wordless relationship between three people who love each other. Is there an event that this picture is supposed to represent? Well, some see it as a picture of exactly what I just said, the eternal love of the three members of the Trinity for each other. And again, you get this kind of stillness. You get this kind of sense that they could sit here forever.